Hi, my name is Christine Gilfillan. I'm the Associate Director at Berks Women in Crisis. I want to welcome you to our story program, The Place You Start, for Berks Women in Crisis. My guest today is Susan Fromm. As you may know from viewing previous stories, this is our 40th anniversary at Berks Women in Crisis. And Susan and I actually go back to the 80s, the 1980s, and our involvement with the organization. So Susan's also currently a board member and also was a board member for many, many years in the past. So she's come back as a board member in the last few years and is still very much involved with the organization. So this was a great time to bring Susan in for the interview. And
thank you.
Sure. And usually the first question I ask is, what was it, if you can remember back to our involvement in the 80s, what was it that brought you to become involved with Berks Women in Crisis?
So, and I was thinking about this yesterday so that I could gather my thoughts a little bit. What brought me to Berks Women in Crisis was actually a friend at work. My husband and I had just moved back to Berks County, to Reading. Didn't have kids yet. I really didn't know anybody. Certainly I had no peers and friends, and a friend at work asked me if I wanted to help with the marketing materials for a Berks Women in Crisis fundraiser. And it was for a movie. That's way back in the days where we used to do the movie events. And of course I really had no idea what I was saying yes to, but thought, well, this could be a fun way to meet some new people. And that's how I got involved. And I think for maybe 2 years I worked on just the fundraisers, and at some point I said, well, I really like this work, but I would like to know more about the agency. So I asked for an opportunity to tour the shelter. And one thing led to another. So I got to tour the shelter and then thought to myself, wow, this is something I think I'd really like to be involved with.
Right.
So I asked if I could join the board, and I did. I was invited to join the board. I think maybe this was around 1989. My son was born in 1990, so I sort of date everything to, was I pregnant? How old were my children?
I remember.
So, yes, right. And the first fundraiser I think I helped with, I was just newly pregnant. And then, of course, there was this little baby. And I know you remember me bringing him to our fundraising committee meetings, and we would pass him around the table. And just to blow your mind, he is going to be 26 in December. So there's that takes us way back. In any case, I asked if I could apply to join the board, and I had an interview, and I remember nothing from the interview except being asked if I was a feminist. And that question just really threw me, because I had never thought of myself as being a feminist. And I remember I hemmed and hawed, and to be perfectly honest, I'm not even sure how I answered that question, but I knew that I thought that this was the type of work I wanted to get involved with. Shortly thereafter, I was asked if I was willing to take on the vice president position. And I said, well, okay. It was a time of huge transition, and the agency then the agency now looks nothing like what it did then, and the professionalism and the growth. And I know that's another story, but there was a lot of transition, a lot of turmoil. They asked if I would be vice president, and I said sure, as long as it's not a succession position, because I had just joined the board. And of course everybody said no, of course not. And then 2 months later, when the president resigned, there I found myself as president of the board, a position that I kept for a long time.
There were no term limits then.
There were no term limits then, exactly. And we got involved in different projects, and again, one thing led to another. And yes, I was president for quite a while.
I think probably one of the biggest projects that you were instrumental in was the Emma Lazarus Place. And we've actually reached a point after 40 years where the Emma Lazarus Place is a townhome complex that we own in South Reading, and things change all the time. We've actually reached a point now where we won't be the owners of the complex anymore after this year, but I remember when it was being built, it was very state of the art. It was the first transitional housing complex at a domestic violence shelter, like anywhere to be found, and it had a child care center. So
Right.
That must be one of the things that you remember the most, was that whole process.
Absolutely, and I think the development, the development of that project and then seeing it through is what kept me involved longer. You know, I probably had exceeded my shelf life, but it kept me involved because we were involved with this project, and it was so state of the art. No other at the time we believed and were told that there were no other domestic violence programs, that this was beyond transitional. It was even long term. And I'm feeling
3 years,
right,
up to 3 years.
With childcare on site. So yes, it was really groundbreaking at the time, and it was a wonderful project to be involved with. I learned so much, and it really was. It was very near and dear to my heart, and very much a special project for me.
Well, and I just want to be clear that we've had the complex since the late 90s,
Yes,
the mid 90s,
right.
and so many families have lived in that housing complex where we followed women for 2 to 3 years, where they completed nursing degrees, and it was just a wonderful way for us to see the progress of those families. And even though we're not going to own the townhomes anymore, we're still working with the Reading Housing Authority and other people in the business of housing to keep those transitional housing slots open for our clients and survivors, so that they have that resource. We're just not going to own them anymore. But that's how things change and evolve over time.
Right, and I think that what we're discovering, or what we had a series of meetings going back maybe a year or 2 years, working through the process of figuring out how to best own, operate, handle, supervise, advise Emma Lazarus townhomes. I think what we discovered is that we are in the domestic violence, education, prevention, counseling business. Berks Women in Crisis, perhaps what we don't do as well is be in the housing, the housing management business.
The brick and mortar.
The brick and mortar. We can do much better advising residents, I think, and providing the services that we are best at providing, and not worrying about what needs to happen when the air conditioning breaks or the furnace breaks, or so forth. So it's been a really interesting journey, personally speaking, watching this whole transition. And I did take a break from Berks Women in Crisis. I sat out for a little while. I thought it was time for me to move on and get involved in a few other things. But the day I went to the grand opening ceremony for our new facility, I said to myself, I want to be involved again. I would like to, so I asked if I could, but the work that the agency is doing now is so exciting, and I realized that I had taken a long enough break and just wanted to be reconnected to this organization that's doing such great things in the community.
So what's the most exciting thing that you see now about the organization, or what makes you most excited?
Well, I think immediately the 40th anniversary. I mean, when we think about that and where we were 40 years ago and what we're doing now, the level of sophistication. Prevention education is near and dear to my heart, so I think the programs that we're doing in the prevention education department arena, Camp Peaceworks. I was there when we formed Peaceworks and created it, so I think that's really incredible. The community engagement that we've accomplished at this point. So I don't know that any one thing in particular, but again, I think the fact that we are hosting this 40th anniversary celebration in December, and the type of event that we're planning, and the community involvement and engagement that we are anticipating, says to me that this is an agency we've arrived. So
that's great.
Yeah.
So, I think for me, I've been involved with the organization just almost as long as you have. I remember that first movie, The Color Purple.
Right.
I think was the first movie that we did. So I've been really grateful to see you back again the last few years and involved again. It's been a great process.
Thank you.
So I really want to thank you for coming on the program.
Thank you.
And for being part of our board.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to do this program. It was fun.
Yeah. Thank you
very much.
Thank you for tuning in to The Place You Start. We have guests stopping by each week. Check in again for more stories at berkswomenincrisis.org. And be sure to like us on Facebook and follow us on YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter.